At 56, I expected peace, not eviction. Standing on the porch of the home I maintained for 3 decades, watching Daniel lock the door, I realized our marriage meant nothing compared to the demands of the parasites he chose to shelter. They think I am just a disposable, aging woman with no fight left. They are wrong. I know exactly who paid for the roof over their heads, and I am about to remind them. My name is Margaret Holloway. To the outside world, I am a 56-year-old woman of European descent, the kind you might pass in the grocery store aisle without a second glance. I have always preferred it that way. Silence and privacy were the luxuries I cultivated with the same dedication I applied to my garden. For 32 years, I shared this quiet life with Daniel Holloway. We built a routine that felt like granite solid, immovable, and safe. Or so I believed. Our home, a 2-story colonial in the suburbs that I had meticulously renovated with my own inheritance money 2 decades ago, was supposed to be our sanctuary. It was where we planned to age gracefully, surrounded by the books I collected and the antique furniture I restored. But 6 months ago, the air in the hallways began to change. It started not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating heaviness. The sanctuary was breached, and the invaders did not break down the door. My husband held it open for them. It began with a phone call Daniel took in the garage, his voice hushed and urgent. 2 days later, he told me that his extended family needed help. When he said family, I expected a cousin crashing on the couch for a weekend. I did not expect the caravan that arrived. It was his sister-in-law's family, people I had met perhaps 3 times at weddings, who showed up with suitcases, bins, and a sense of entitlement that filled the foyer instantly. They were loud, chaotic, and numerous. It is only for a little while. Margaret, Daniel had told me, his eyes avoiding mine as he carried their boxes into the guest wing. They hit a rough patch. We have the space. Don't be difficult. That was the first time I felt the shift. The word difficult hung in the air between us like a suspended blade. In the past, Daniel would have consulted me. We would have sat at the kitchen island with tea, discussed the logistics, and agreed on a timeline. This time, I was merely informed. Week by week, the house ceased to be mine. The living room, once a place for my evening reading, was commandeered by the new occupants. Their noise was constant, a drone of television, loud arguments, and thumping footsteps that vibrated through the floorboards. When I tried to reclaim my space, setting my book on the coffee table, it would be moved to a high shelf or buried under piles of mail that did not belong to me. I remember standing in the kitchen on a rainy Tuesday, watching a woman I barely knew rearrange my spice rack. When I cleared my throat to object, she didn't even turn around. Daniel walked in at that moment. I looked at him, waiting for him to re-establish the boundaries of our home. Daniel, I can't find the cinnamon, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and the living room is full of laundry. He looked at me, not with the warmth of 3 decades, but with a cold, irritated exhaustion. Margaret, honestly, he snapped, pouring himself a coffee while bypassing the mug I had set out for him. They are guests. You are making them feel uncomfortable with your hovering. Can't you just be gracious for once? I froze. My concern for my own home was now framed as a character flaw. The look in his eyes was one I had never seen before. It was dismissive, bordering on contempt. It was as if my presence in the room was an annoyance he had to manage. The atmosphere in the house turned frigid. Decisions were made without me. Dinner plans were set for 7 o'clock. But when I arrived at the table, they were already halfway through the meal, the conversation flowing in a tight circle that excluded me entirely. If I spoke, the table would go quiet for a second before someone changed the subject, effectively erasing my contribution. One evening, I found my favourite armchair moved to the basement to make room for a playpen for a child that wasn't even related to us by blood. When I confronted Daniel, he didn't even look up from his tablet. It was just in the way. "Margaret," he said, his voice flat and devoid of affection. "We need to prioritize the group. You have the whole bedroom upstairs. Why do you need to be down here all the time?" I walked up the stairs that night feeling the walls closing in. The house was still standing. The photos were still on the walls, but the foundation had cracked. I was being edited out of the picture of my own life, pixel by pixel, and the man holding the eraser was the one who had sworn to protect me. The phrase "just for a little while" quietly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating permanence that nobody acknowledged, but everyone understood. 3 weeks had passed, and the suitcases were no longer stacked by the door. They were emptied into the drawers I had cleared out under duress. The temporary air mattress in the den was replaced by a solid oak bed frame that Daniel had ordered without consulting me. "It is better for their backs." "Margaret," he had said when the delivery truck arrived at 7 in the morning. "You don't want them sleeping on plastic forever, do you?" I stood in the hallway, clutching my robe, watching 2 strangers wrestle the heavy box up my stairs. I thought they were leaving by the 1st of the month. "Daniel?" "That is what you said." He didn't even turn to look at me. He was too busy directing the movers, his hand resting casually on the shoulder of his sister-in-law. "Sheila. Plans change. Be flexible." That was the new mantra. Be flexible. It was a code word for surrender. The house, once a reflection of my quiet routines, morphed into a hostile environment. My kitchen, where I used to spend hours baking bread in silence, was now a war zone of grease and noise. Sheila and her mother took over the cooking, filling the air with the smell of burnt garlic and cheap frying oil. When I tried to enter to make myself a cup of tea, the chatter would stop instantly. 6 pairs of eyes would swivel toward me, not with hostility, but with a dismissive blankness, as if a stray cat had wandered in. "Oh, Margaret?" Sheila said one evening, blocking the path to the refrigerator. "We are making a big dinner for everyone. Can you come back later? It is just too crowded in here for you to be puttering around." "This is my kitchen," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. "Daniel said you wouldn't mind," she replied, offering a tight, artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He said, you usually just have toast anyway." I looked over her shoulder to the living room. Daniel was sitting in his recliner, my father's old recliner, laughing at something Sheila's husband was saying. He looked relaxed, younger even. He was glowing in the admiration of these people, feeding off their dependence on him. I realized then that he wasn't just tolerating them. He was enjoying the audience. The degradation was subtle at first, masked as jokes. During dinner, which was now served at 6:30, a time I had never preferred, Daniel began to curate the conversation to exclude me. If I brought up a topic, perhaps an article I read or a concern about the garden, he would sigh loud enough for the table to hear. "Margaret is obsessed with that garden," he told the table, rolling his eyes playfully. "She cares more about the hydrangeas than actual people. It's a bit sad, really." The table erupted in laughter. I gripped my fork, feeling the heat rise up my neck. That is not true. Daniel, I take pride in our home. Someone has to. See, he gestured at me with his steak knife. Always so serious. You suck the air right out of the room. Honey, relax. It wasn't just the insults. It was the erasing of my authority. On a Friday afternoon, I came home to find the heavy velvet curtains in the living room gone. In their place were cheap, sheer panels that let in too much glaring light. "Where are my curtains?" I asked, dropping my keys on the console table. Daniel walked in from the patio, holding a beer. Sheila thought these opened up the space. The old ones were depressing, like a mausoleum. Those were custom made. Daniel, they cost $2,000. Money, money, money. He groaned, shaking his head. That is all you worry about. These were on sale. They're fine. Stop trying to control everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had shared my life with was looking at me with the eyes of a stranger. There was no partnership left, only a power struggle I was losing because I hadn't realized I was fighting. He was rewriting the rules of our existence to suit an audience that clapped for him. That night, lying in bed while Daniel snored beside me, I reached for the reading glasses I always kept on the nightstand. They were gone. I searched the drawer, then the floor. Nothing. The next morning, I found them in the downstairs trash can, buried under coffee grounds. They hadn't fallen. They had been thrown away. When I held them up, dirty and bent, I looked at the chaotic living room full of people who were supposedly family. No one looked at me. They were all too busy watching television, secure in the knowledge that the woman standing in the doorway was no longer the mistress of the house. I was just a ghost they were waiting to exorcise. And Daniel was handing them the holy water. The boundaries of my life continued to shrink, retreating until I was confined to the edges of the very home I had paid for. It started with the mornings. For 2 decades, I had showered at 6:30, a ritual that grounded me before the day began. On a Tuesday morning, I reached for the brass handle of the master bathroom, the bathroom attached to my bedroom, only to find it locked. The sound of running water and the humid scent of cheap strawberry shampoo seeped through the wood. When I knocked, Daniel opened the door a crack. Steam billowed out, clouding his glasses. "Daniel, this is my time," I whispered, conscious of the sleeping house. "Why is Sheila in our shower?" He adjusted his glasses, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "The guest shower has low pressure. Margaret, Sheila has thick hair. It takes her forever to rinse it out. Just use the powder room downstairs." "The powder room has no shower," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Then wait," he hissed, glancing back at the steam-filled room. "You have nowhere to go anyway. Why are you so rigid? It makes you impossible to live with." Impossible. Rigid. The words were planted like seeds, and over the next week, they sprouted into a thicket of labels designed to devalue me. I was no longer Margaret, the wife and partner. I was Margaret the obstacle, Margaret the relic. The isolation moved from the bathroom to the dinner table. On Friday, I came downstairs at 6 o'clock to find the dining room full. Every chair was taken. Daniel sat at the head of the table, a spot he had never claimed before, laughing as he carved a roast chicken. Sheila sat to his right, in my chair. I stood in the archway, waiting for someone to notice. It took a full minute. "Oh," Sheila said, pausing with a forkful of potatoes halfway to her mouth. "We didn't think you were hungry." You spent all afternoon in the garden. I need to eat. Sheila, I said, staring at Daniel. He didn't look up. Grab a plate and eat in the den. Margaret. The kids are loud tonight. You hate noise. It is better for everyone. I am not a child to be sent to another room. I said. Stop making a scene. Daniel slammed the carving knife down, the clatter silencing the room. God, you are so difficult. Everything is a battle with you. Can't you see we are trying to have a nice family moment? You are just bringing everyone down with your misery. I turned and walked away. I did not go to the den. I went to the kitchen, made a sandwich, and ate it standing over the sink in the dark. As I chewed, I listened. I heard them laughing. I heard the clinking of wine glasses, my crystal wine glasses, which I only used for anniversaries. The psychological siege tightened when the mail arrived on Saturday. I usually handled the bills. My background in property management meant I was meticulous with numbers. But when I reached for the stack of envelopes on the counter, Daniel's hand clamped over mine. His grip was not affectionate. It was restraining. I have got it, he said, pulling the pile toward him. I always do the budget. Daniel? You hate the paperwork. I am taking over, he said, his voice hard. You are getting forgetful. I don't want you messing up the accounts. I changed the online passwords this morning. Don't try to log in. You will just lock us out. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. Forgetful, I remembered the exact closing cost of this house in 1998. I remembered the social security numbers of both of us. I said nothing. I simply nodded and pulled my hand back. But as he turned away to sort the letters, I saw him slide a thick envelope from the bank under his newspaper. He was hiding statements. I began to watch. I became a ghost in my own hallways, moving silently, observing the way they looked at the furniture, the walls, and me. They weren't looking at the house as guests. They were looking at it as owners measuring for renovation. The confirmation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the library, a room they rarely entered because it smelled of old paper. The door was ajar. I heard Daniel and Sheila in the hallway. She is driving me crazy. Danny? Sheila said. Her voice was low, whining. She walks around like she is judging us. The kids are scared of her. I know, Daniel replied. His voice sounded weary, but conspiratorial. I know. Just hang in there. How much longer? Sheila asked. You said by the winter. It is getting cold. There was a pause. I held my breath, my hand gripping the edge of the mahogany desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I am working on the legal side, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the silence of the house. If I can prove she is mentally unfit, or if I can just get her to snap and leave voluntarily, it will be easier. Once she is gone, we can knock down that wall between the master and the guest room. It will give you plenty of space. I stood frozen. He wasn't just siding with them. He was planning a renovation on my grave. The house wasn't being shared. It was being transferred. And I was the only thing left to be demolished. The explosion didn't happen with a scream. It happened with a suitcase. 2 suitcases, to be exact, standing like sentinels by the front door. My suitcases. The old leather ones I had bought for our trip to Italy 10 years ago. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The house was strangely quiet. The television was off. Daniel was standing in the foyer, his arms crossed over his chest. Sheila and her husband were sitting on the couch. watching me with the intense, predatory focus of vultures waiting for a wounded animal to finally stumble. "What is going on?" "Daniel," I asked. My voice felt detached, coming from somewhere outside my body. Daniel didn't uncross his arms. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, anywhere but at me. We had a family meeting," he said. The inclusion of family and the exclusion of me in that sentence hit me like a physical blow. "We think it is best if you take some time away. Just for a little while." I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "Time away from my own house, Daniel. Have you lost your mind?" See, Sheila piped up from the couch, her voice dripping with fake concern. "She is getting hysterical again. This is exactly what we were talking about." "Danny, it is not safe for the kids." "I am not hysterical," I snapped, turning to face her. "I am being evicted from my own home by a woman who doesn't even pay for the water she uses to wash her hair or gore it." "Stop." Daniel stepped between us, his face twisting into a mask of anger I didn't recognize. "This environment, it is toxic. You are making everyone miserable. I booked you a room at the Motel 6 on the highway. Just for 2 weeks. Until you calm down and we can reassess." "The Motel 6, I stared at him. "You are kicking me out to a roadside motel while these people live in my home." "It is our home." "Margaret," he said, cold as ice. "And right now, you are the problem. I need you to leave. Now. If you don't..." "Sheila's husband says he will call the police and say you were threatening them. We don't want that." I looked at Sheila's husband. He was a large man, leaning back with a smug grin, holding my remote control. He gave a little shrug, as if to say, "Try me." The betrayal was so absolute it paralyzed me. There was no love left in Daniel's eyes. There wasn't even pity. There was only calculation. He wanted the house. He wanted the hero status with his new family. And I was just the debris he needed to sweep out the door. "You packed my things," I stated, looking at the bags. "Just the essentials," Daniel said, reaching for the door handle. "Clothes, toiletries. You can come back for the rest when things settle down." I walked to the door. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I felt a strange, cold numbness spreading through my chest, freezing the tears before they could form. I picked up the handle of the suitcase. It felt light. Too light. 30 years of life packed into 2 bags by a man who wanted me gone. "Here is some cash for food," Daniel said, thrusting a few $20 bills at me. He wouldn't touch my hand. "Go on. Margaret, don't make this harder than it has to be." I stepped out onto the porch. The night air was biting, a sharp contrast to the heated suffocation of the house. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home. Then, I heard it, the sound that shattered the last fragment of my heart. Laughter. Loud, raucous laughter erupting from the living room, followed by the sound of a champagne cork popping. They weren't just relieving tension, they were celebrating. I stood there in the darkness, the gravel of the driveway pressing through the thin soles of my slippers. I looked up at the bedroom window, my bedroom window. The light clicked on. I saw Sheila's silhouette move across the curtains. The man I loved was dead. He had died the moment he chose to humiliate me to please a crowd of leeches. I stood alone under the street lamp, shivering not from the cold, but from the sheer violence of the realization. They thought they had won. They thought they had discarded a broken, powerless old woman. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. They had made a fatal error. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. They forgot that I was the one who handled the insurance, the deeds, and the bank accounts. I turned away from the house, my back straightening. I wasn't leaving to hide. I was leaving to sharpen my knife. "Enjoy the champagne, Daniel," I whispered to the cold wind, "because it is the last thing you will ever taste in this house." I did not go to the Motel 6. I refused to let Daniel dictate the location of my misery. Instead, I drove to a quiet, extended-stay hotel in the next county, paid for with the emergency credit card I had kept hidden in the lining of my purse for 15 years. It was a sterile room with beige walls and a kitchenette. But it was silent. Silence was exactly what I needed to think. I sat at the small particle board desk and opened my laptop. Daniel had been so focused on physically removing me from the house that he had forgotten what I used to do for a living before I retired to tend my roses. For 25 years, I was not just a housewife. I was a senior asset manager for one of the largest real estate holding firms in the state. I spent decades untangling complex estates, finding hidden assets, and reading the fine print that arrogance usually glossed over. Daniel saw a fragile old woman. He forgot he was married to a woman who used to eat audit reports for breakfast. I logged into the cloud server where we kept our digital records. Daniel had changed the password to our joint checking account, thinking that would cut off my supply. It was a clumsy move. I bypassed the front door entirely and went through the back end of the trust accounts we set up in 2005. "Let us see what you have been doing, Daniel," I whispered to the glowing screen. The trail was sloppy. I saw withdrawals for consulting fees paid to a company registered in his brother-in-law's name. I saw charges for furniture, electronics, and even a down payment on a luxury SUV, all siphoned from our retirement savings. He was draining us dry to fund their lifestyle. But then I found the weapon I was looking for. I pulled up the deed to the house. My eyes scanned the legal description, looking for the loophole I vaguely remembered from the closing 20 years ago. There it was, buried in paragraph 4, section B. When we bought the house, my inheritance paid for 80% of the down payment. To protect that, my father's lawyer had insisted on a specific clause regarding the right of survivorship and tenancy in common. Daniel had filed a quitclaim deed 2 weeks ago to add Sheila's name to the title, likely to give them legal standing to stay. I saw the digital scan of the document. My signature was at the bottom. But as I zoomed in, a cold smile touched my lips. The date next to my signature was written in blue ink. The rest of the document was in black. And more importantly, on the date listed October 14th, I was in the hospital getting a minor procedure on my knee. I had never signed that document. He had forged my signature, and he had done a terrible job of it. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered, "Holloway. Is that really you?" "Hello, Julian?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know it has been a long time. I hope you are not too busy." "For the best forensic accountant I ever worked with." "Never," Julian replied. "I heard you were living the quiet life, gardening and baking pies. The pie is burnt." "Julian," I said, "I need you to look at a quitclaim deed. I believe it is fraudulent, and I need to know the exact status of the Holloway family trust." "Send it over," he said, the rustle of papers audible in the background. "If they forged a deed on a property held in a trust, Margaret, That is a felony. They are not just looking at eviction, they are looking at prison time. I know. I said, I want everything ready. Do not file anything yet. I want to wait until the ink is dry on their next mistake. You always were terrifying when you were quiet. Julian chuckled. I almost feel sorry for them. Don't be, I replied. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the world was dark and indifferent. I imagined them back at the house, probably drinking my wine, sleeping in my bed, thinking the old witch was crying in a roadside motel. They had no idea that the timer had just started ticking. They thought they had kicked out a helpless wife. They were about to find out they had declared war on a professional strategist. For the next 72 hours, I did not leave the hotel room. I lived on black coffee and the cold glow of my laptop screen, dissecting the last 5 years of my life. I was no longer a wife grieving a marriage. I was a forensic auditor dissecting a corpse to find the cause of death. And the cause, it turned out, was not just emotional neglect. It was grand larceny. Julian had sent over the secure files from the county clerk's office and the bank's back-end logs. What I found made the betrayal in my living room look like a playground dispute. I discovered that on September 15th, exactly 1 week after Sheila and her family moved in, a power of attorney document had been filed with our primary bank. I pulled up the digital copy. It claimed that I, Margaret Holloway, was mentally incapacitated due to early onset dementia and granted Daniel full control over my personal assets. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling not from fear, but from a cold, sharp rage. "Julian," I said when he answered. "Do I sound incapacitated to you? You sound like you are about to burn a city to the ground." "Margaret," Julian replied, his voice rough with sleep. I saw the document, the doctor's signature on the medical affidavit. It belongs to a Dr. Aris Thorne? I looked him up. He is an orthopedist. Margaret, a bone doctor, and he happens to be Sheila's cousin. So they declared me incompetent using a bone doctor so Daniel could drain my accounts. I said, staring at the screen where a transaction history was loading. Look at the transfer on October 2nd. $12,000. I see it. Julian said, sent to Kincaid Enterprise. That is Sheila's husband's shell company. And another one. Look at November 1st. $8,500 for consulting fees. Margaret. Daniel isn't just letting them live there. He is funding their debts with your inheritance. I sat back in the stiff hotel chair. It wasn't just that Daniel was weak. He was complicit. He had been playing the role of the beleaguered husband, caught between his wife and his family. But in reality, he was the architect. He had used their presence as a smokescreen to access the money my father left me, money that was supposed to be untouchable. He thinks I am just sitting in a motel room crying, I whispered. He thinks I am too proud to check the accounts because he told me I was confused and forgetful. He gaslit me to cover a felony. Margaret. Julian's voice turned serious. We can go to the police right now. This is fraud. Elder abuse, even, depending on how the statutes are interpreted in this state. No, I said, watching the cursor blink on the screen. Not yet. If I go to the police now, he will claim it was a misunderstanding, or that I verbally agreed and forgot. He will use the dementia lie to discredit me. I need him to hang himself completely. I need him to think he is safe. Over the next 2 days, my phone rang incessantly. Daniel called 14 times. Sheila called 3. I watched the screen light up and fade to black each time, never touching the answer button. On the 3rd day, a voicemail came through. I played it on speaker. Margaret. Pick up the phone. Daniel's voice sounded tight, anxious. The bank called me today. They said there was a flag on the transfer to Sheila's husband. I told them it was a mistake. But they want to speak to you. If they call you, just tell them you authorized it. Okay. Don't be difficult. It's just a formality. Call me back. I listened to the message again. I could hear the tremor in his voice. He wasn't worried about me. He was terrified because the bank's fraud algorithm, which I had quietly triggered by marking a specific transaction as suspicious through the automated system, was sniffing around. He wanted me to validate his lie. He needed me to be the confused, obedient wife one last time to save his skin. I deleted the voicemail. I did not call the bank. I did not call Daniel. I simply sat in the silence of the hotel room, watching the sun go down, knowing that his panic was rising with every hour of my silence. He was waiting for a scream, a fight, anything to prove I was emotional and unstable. But I gave him nothing. And in the vacuum of my silence, he was beginning to make mistakes. Keep digging. Julian. I texted. I want to know where the money for the renovation is coming from. The reply came back 2 minutes later. You are not going to like this. He took out a second mortgage on the house 3 days ago, forged your signature again. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. That was it. He had mortgaged a house he didn't fully own, based on a fraudulent deed, to pay for a renovation I didn't want. He had crossed the line from a bad husband to a desperate criminal. And now, I had the paper trail to prove it. It had been 5 days since I quietly flagged the transaction on the joint account, effectively freezing the funds Daniel was trying to funnel to Sheila's husband. The silence from my end was no longer just a pause. It was a noose, and I could feel it tightening around their necks from across the county. Julian informed me that 3 checks written by Sheila's husband had bounced that morning. The renovation contractor they had hired without my permission had walked off the job site. The pressure was mounting. And just as I predicted, the cracks began to show. My phone rang at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was Daniel. This time, I did not let it go to voicemail. I took a deep breath, consciously relaxing my throat to pitch my voice higher, softer, more fragile. I answered on the 4th ring. Daniel, I whispered, letting a tremor ripple through the word. Margaret, oh, thank God. Daniel's voice rushed through the speaker, breathless and strained. Where are you? I have been sick with worry. We all have. I am at a hotel, I said, pausing as if struggling to find the words. The motel you sent me to. It was awful. Daniel? There were people yelling in the parking lot. I was scared. I am so sorry, honey, he said, his tone shifting instantly to a cloying, patronizing warmth. I didn't know it was that bad. I just needed you to have some space. You know how you get overwhelmed. I just want to come home, I said. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but I delivered it with perfect, pathetic sincerity. I miss my garden. I miss us. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He thought he had me. He thought the week of isolation had broken my spirit, just as he intended. We miss you too, Margaret, he said. But listen, we have a small problem, A misunderstanding, really. The bank. They froze the renovation fund because they couldn't reach you. The contractor is threatening to sue us, and Sheila is in tears. She just wanted to make the house nice for everyone. Oh no. I breathed. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just didn't recognize the charge. It is okay. It is okay. He soothed, urgency bleeding into his voice. We can fix it. But you need to come home. We need to sit down and sign a waiver to release the funds. And there are a few other papers, just to make sure nobody can kick you out again. I want to protect you. Margaret, protect me. The audacity was breathtaking. He was asking me to come back to sign away the last of my rights so he could cover his theft. I don't understand the papers. Daniel? I said, feigning confusion. You know I get mixed up with numbers lately. I know. Baby. I know, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. He thought the dementia narrative was working. I will explain everything. I will handle the hard parts. You just need to sign. Can you come by tomorrow? Say 5 o'clock. We will have a nice dinner. A reconciliation. Will Sheila be there? I asked. Yes, the whole family. We want to apologize to you. We want a fresh start. Okay, I said. I will come. Please don't be mad at me anymore. I could never be mad at you. He lied. See you tomorrow at 5. I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the dark window of the hotel room. The fragile, confused woman he had just spoken to vanished instantly. In her place was the asset manager who had once stared down corporate raiders without blinking. I picked up my other phone, the burner I used to talk to Julian. It is set. I told him. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock. He thinks I am coming to sign the release for the frozen funds and the new mortgage papers. Do you want me to send the police in? First, Julian asked. No, I said. If the police go in now, it is just a dispute. I need him to put the pen in my hand. I need him to present the fraudulent documents to me in front of witnesses. I need the intent to be undeniable. You are walking into a den of wolves. Margaret, Julian warned. No, Julian, I corrected him, closing the laptop with a sharp click. I am walking into a trap I built myself. They just don't know they are the bait. I spent the rest of the night organizing the file folder I would bring. Bank statements, the forged deed, the medical affidavit from the bone doctor, and the time-stamped logs of the money transfers. I placed them in a harmless-looking tote bag, underneath a knitting project I hadn't touched in years. They were expecting a broken wife coming to beg for her room back. They were expecting a confused old woman who would sign anything to stop the yelling. They had absolutely no idea that I was bringing the entire legal code of the state down on their heads. The storm was not coming from the outside. It was walking right through the front door. I arrived at the house at exactly 5 o'clock. The driveway was cluttered with a dumpster filled with debris from the unauthorized renovation. Pieces of my life discarded like trash. I walked up the steps, my tote bag heavy on my shoulder, and opened the door without knocking. The dining room was staged for a performance. Daniel sat at the head of the table, flanked by a stack of documents. Sheila and her husband, Mark, sat on either side of him, looking like vultures waiting for a carcass. When I entered, the air in the room shifted. They straightened up, putting on their masks of concern. "Margaret, you made it," Daniel said, standing up and rushing over to guide me to a chair. His grip on my elbow was firm, steering me like a child. "Come, sit. We have tea." I sat down, placing my bag on the floor. I looked around the table. They were all smiling, but their eyes were tight. They needed my signature to unlock the money they had already spent. "We don't want to keep you too long." "Margaret," Sheila said, sliding a plate of cookies toward me. "We know you are tired. Daniel just needs you to sign these papers so we can fix the banking error. Then you can rest." Daniel pushed a document toward me. It was a waiver of liability and a retroactive authorization for the withdrawal of $40,000. "Just sign right there at the bottom." "Honey," Daniel said, holding out a pen. "It just tells the bank that you forgot you approved the transfer. It clears everything up." I took the pen. I held it for a moment, watching them lean in, their greed practically vibrating in the air. Then, I set the pen down. "I cannot sign this, Daniel," I said softly. "What? Why?" Daniel's smile faltered. "Margaret, don't start this again. We discussed this. You are confused. You need to trust me." "I am not confused," I said, my voice dropping the wavering tremor I had used on the phone. I reached into my bag and pulled out a blue folder. "But I think you are—" I opened the folder and slid a piece of paper across the mahogany table. It was the affidavit of incompetence. Dr. Eris Thorne. I read the name aloud. An orthopedist? Sheila's cousin. Interesting choice for a psychiatric evaluation. Daniel? Especially since I have never met the man. The room went dead silent. Sheila's face drained of colour. Mark shifted in his chair, the wood creaking loudly in the quiet. "Margaret?" "I can explain," Daniel stammered, his hand hovering over the paper. "That was just a precaution. We were worried about your memory. My memory is excellent." I interrupted him. I pulled out the next document. "For instance, I remember that on October 14th, the day I allegedly signed the quitclaim deed, giving half my house to Sheila. I was under anesthesia for knee surgery. Here is the hospital record. And here is the forensic analysis of the signature on the deed. It is a forgery. Daniel. And a poor one." Daniel sank back into his chair. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. The fog of arrogance was lifting, replaced by the dawn of terror. He didn't see the broken, discarded wife anymore. He saw the senior asset manager who had audited multi-million-dollar corporations. You knew," he whispered. "You knew the whole time. I knew enough to let you dig the hole deeper," I said, pulling out the bank logs. "I see you took out a second mortgage 3 days ago. Fraudulent application, wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Do you know the mandatory minimum sentence for that combination in this state?" Mark, I looked at Sheila's husband. He was sweating now, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "I didn't sign anything," Mark blurted out, pointing a shaking finger at Daniel. "This was his idea. He said you were senile. He said the money was technically his." "Shut up," Mark Daniel roared, slamming his hand on the table. "No, you shut up," Sheila screamed, standing up. "You said she wouldn't fight back. You said she was weak. Now look at this." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching them turn on each other. It was a chaotic symphony of blame, and I was the conductor. "I have already sent copies of these documents to my lawyer and the fraud department at the bank," I said, my voice cutting through their shouting match like a razor. "The police are not here yet because I wanted to give you a choice." They stopped screaming. All 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. "What choice?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. He looked small, defeated. A man standing in the ruins of a life he had destroyed with his own hubris. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my property," I said, checking my watch. "All of you? Whatever you can carry. If you are still here at 6:15, I hand this folder to the district attorney. And Daniel, if you try to take one single item that I paid for, I will make sure they add grand larceny to the indictment. Margaret, please." Daniel stepped toward me, tears welling in his eyes. "This is our home. We have been married for 30 years. You can't just destroy me." I stood up, towering over him in spirit, if not in height. "I didn't destroy you, Daniel," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I just stopped saving you." The next 45 minutes were a masterclass in panic. The house, which had been filled with the arrogant noise of occupation for months, now echoed with the frantic sounds of a retreat. Sheila and Mark were no longer the confident interlopers who had sneered at me from my own sofa. They were scavengers caught in a spotlight, turning on each other with vicious intensity. "Grab the TV," Mark Sheila shrieked, hauling a laundry basket full of clothes down the stairs, tripping over her own feet. "Don't just stand there staring at him. The truck is not big enough for the TV?" Sheila Mark yelled back. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "And whose fault is that? You said we had time. You said the old hag was out of the picture." I stood by the fireplace, leaning against the mantel, watching them scurry. I did not flinch at the insult. It held no power over me anymore. I was not the old hag. I was the landlord serving an eviction notice. Daniel did not pack. He stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the chaos he had invited, looking at me with wet, imploring eyes. He looked stripped of his dignity, a man who had gambled his entire life on a pair of threes and lost to a royal flush. When Mark and Sheila ran out to the driveway to shove their ill-gotten gains into their van, Daniel took a step toward me. "Margaret, please," he choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "Let me stay. I will sleep in the guest room. I will fix the money. I will work 3 jobs if I have to. Just don't kick me out. I am your husband." I looked at his hand, the hand that had forged my signature, the hand that had held the door open for my replacements. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't hate. Hate requires energy. It was a profound, cool indifference. The cord that had connected us for 32 years hadn't just been cut, it had dissolved. "My husband would have protected me," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You sold me out for a round of applause from people who don't even like you, Daniel. You wanted to be the big man. You wanted to be the savior. And you used my bones to build your pedestal. I was weak," he stammered, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "I just wanted them to respect me. I felt invisible next to you sometimes. You are always so capable, so strong. I just wanted to be the one in charge for once. So you destroyed me to feel tall," I asked. "No, I never meant to hurt you like this. I thought you wouldn't notice. You thought I was stupid. I finished for him. And that is the unforgivable part. You didn't just betray my trust, you insulted my intelligence." Outside, a car horn blared. It was Mark, Danny. "Come on, we need the gas card," Mark yelled from the driveway. The sound shattered Daniel's last defense. He looked at the door, then back at me. He was torn between the family he had chosen and the wife he had discarded, but we both knew he had no choice left. I had taken the choice away. Go, I said. It wasn't a suggestion. Margaret. What will you do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. You will be all alone in this big house. I have always been alone in this house. Daniel? I replied, locking eyes with him. I just didn't realize it until you proved it to me. Now. Get out before I call the detective. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to say he loved me, perhaps to beg one last time, but the look on my face stopped him. He saw the wall I had built. It was high, it was thick, and there was no door for him. He turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked out into the cold evening air. I walked to the front door and watched him climb into the passenger seat of Mark's battered van. He didn't look back. As the taillights faded down the street, disappearing into the darkness, I didn't feel the crushing weight of loneliness I had feared. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. Then the top lock. Click. The silence that rushed back into the hallway wasn't the oppressive silence of the last few months. It was clean. It was mine. The air smelled of stale frying oil and cheap perfume from the intruders, but underneath, I could smell the faint scent of the lemon polish I used to use. I walked into the living room, picked up a throw pillow that Sheila had bought with my money, and dropped it into the trash can. Then I went to the thermostat and turned the heat up to 72 degrees, my preferred temperature, which Daniel had always said was too expensive. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely for the first time in months. My heart was beating slow and strong. I had lost a husband. Yes. But as I looked around the room, reclaiming the shadows and the light, I realized I had found the one person I had nearly lost in the fire myself, and she was stronger than I remembered. The fallout was not immediate, but it was absolute. It arrived like a slow-moving glacier, crushing everything in its path with the irresistible weight of the law. 3 months after the night I evicted them, I sat across a polished conference table in a lawyer's office. The air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Daniel sat opposite me. He looked 10 years older. His shirt was wrinkled, and the arrogance that had once defined his posture was gone, replaced by a permanent slump of defeat. He was alone. Sheila and Mark were not there to support him. As I had predicted, their loyalty ended the moment the money tap ran dry. The district attorney is offering a plea deal. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Helen, said calmly, for the forgery and the misappropriation of funds. If you plead guilty, they might suspend the prison sentence in favor of probation and restitution. But you will have a felony record. Daniel put his head in his hands. I can't pay restitution. I have nothing. Sheila and Mark took the van. They took the electronics. They even took the cash I had in my wallet before they kicked me out of their apartment. That sounds like a personal problem. Daniel, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. You chose your team. You have to live with the score. The destruction of his world was comprehensive. Dr. Aris Thorne, the cousin who had signed the fraudulent medical affidavit, was currently facing a review board that would likely strip him of his medical license. Mark was under investigation by the IRS after my audit revealed he had been laundering money through his shell company long before he met Daniel. And Sheila. She was back in her mother's basement, blaming everyone but herself. But the most satisfying ruin was Daniel's. He had not just lost his wife and his home. He had lost his reputation. In our small community, word traveled fast. The man who tried to commit his sane wife to a facility to steal her inheritance was now a pariah. His golf buddies didn't call. His clients had moved their accounts. Margaret. Daniel looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Can't we just stop this? I will sign the divorce papers. I will give you everything. Just tell the D. To drop the charges. Please. I am begging you. I don't want to go to jail. I looked at him, searching for any spark of the man I had once loved. There was nothing. Just a hollow shell filled with regret. Not for what he did to me, but for the fact that he got caught. I didn't call the D. Daniel? I said softly. The bank did. The state did. You broke the law. You didn't just break my heart. You broke the social contract. You thought I was a resource to be mined, not a human being. I am sorry, he whispered. I know you are, I replied. But sorry does not put the money back in the retirement account. Sorry does not undo the humiliation of being kicked out of my own home in the middle of the night. Sorry is a word. Daniel, justice is an action. I signed the final divorce decree. The settlement was brutal for him. Because of the fraud. The judge had awarded me the entirety of the house and the remaining assets. Daniel was leaving the marriage with his clothes and a mountain of legal debt. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my dress. I felt light. The heavy cloak of invisibility I had worn for the last year was gone. Margaret, Daniel called out as I reached the door. What? What am I supposed to do now? I paused, my hand on the brass knob. I looked back at him one last time. You are a smart man, Daniel, I said. I am sure you will figure it out, but you will do it outside of my house. I walked out of the office and into the bright, crisp afternoon sun. The city noises were loud, cars honking, people talking, life moving forward, but to me, it sounded like a symphony. I walked to my car, got in, and drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. The scars of their occupation were gone. The dumpster had been hauled away. The roses I had replanted were beginning to bloom. Defiant splashes of red against the green. I walked up the steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. As the water began to boil, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't making tea for two. I was making it for myself. And that was more than enough. I took my cup to the window and watched the sun dip below the horizon. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to write me out of my own story. But they forgot the most important rule of all. The author always has the final word. And my story was just beginning. Thank you so much for tuning in to hear my story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments section below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed following my journey to justice, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button to support the channel and help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.